Hello, everyone, and welcome to the live stream for now Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. Our conversation tonight is about creating community resilience. And as I say in the title for this, I expect this to be part one and could easily be an ongoing conversation, particularly because we only have about an hour or so tonight to talk. And this could go in a lot of different directions and build and grow in many different ways. As we get started, I want to let you know that I came to this subject for tonight's live stream by reaching out to the podcast patrons and ask them what to cover on tonight's live stream in the community Discord. And my friend Jason suggested things like decentralized finance, including NFTs and cryptocurrency as they relate to debt, reciprocity, or gift economy supported by permaculture, the role of, or something like the role of gambling in human evolution, modern society, and in the sort of future that permaculture would like to create. I would certainly love to dig into something like that in upcoming live streams, but I need to reread David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years, and lean into some additional material that looks at debt, money, and economics through an anthropological lens rather than one of politics or economics, to see and discuss the ways in which money is used by people rather than as just an idea or theory. There's a definition that I want to dig up that I really like when we look at money in that way. If you're here with me tonight, if you could drop something into the chat just to say hello. Things look a little weird tonight, and I'm not sure what's going on. Or if for some reason you cannot chat, let me know so I can see about editing that real quick so that we can get that running. But yeah, from what Jason shared with those, as if those weren't big enough hand grenades to explore, Julie mentioned the depressing and awful state of the world at the moment and how it can seem kind of crazy and overwhelming. And with the upcoming anniversary of 1/6 here in the US and the recent acceleration in the collapse of industrial civilization, as we look at all the crazy weird weather events and climate change, it can be a little disheartening or overwhelming to be going through all of this right now. Oh, thank you, Julie. I'm glad that chat is working. I'll have to see what's going on. And okay, awesome. I figured it out. I had my window moved down a little too far and so couldn't see the chat properly. So it really does feel like a new year and new ideas. So from Julie's questions, that's where I wanted to look, where I kind of came to this topic for tonight's live stream, creating community resilience and trying to take a positive approach to everything that is going on in the world so that we have solutions in order to move through everything that's happening. I think that permaculture is a great on-the-ground solution for securing our basic needs and doing a lot of that work, but we can also build on top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in order to create something greater than just our own personal well-being. Now, before we get into this, I would like to caveat this a little, that my view of the world comes through my own particular upbringing, something that I've reconnected with in recent years as I grew up in one of the historic Peace churches with a rather radical worldview, which I wasn't aware of until I was much older. Grew up in the Anabaptist traditions as a Brethren, and so in that space it was about militant pacifism and with it Christian anarchy. I also grew up in a family that viewed the world through a class lens after the many, many years and generations, my mother's family in particular, growing up extremely poor in Appalachia. And so until like the mid 80s, my family didn't have a lot of wealth, means, or resources. And that really informed where we came from. And as you'll hear in some interviews and upcoming coming conversations, my grandmother's world was one where everyone was invited to the table. And she was very keen on making sure that all of us came from a similar kind of place as well. And I used to speak with her about that. It's like, Nana, why are you like this? And she said it was because we were too poor to be able to live any other way. Everyone within the community always had to help each other. And so that's kind of where all of that together creates this kind of community or collective approach to solutions, moving from that zone 00 or the self outward into the world. And though I acknowledge Maslow's hierarchy, it isn't my favorite perspective because I think that we can actualize long before we reach that upper level. And that's where I pull on some of the work from like Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, and that if we have meaning and purpose in our lives, that we can do a lot of good even if we're in a place where we might be struggling. And yeah, those are some of the pieces that come together. And that's also where, in thinking about all of this, I don't come at it as an expert. If I can be called an expert in anything, the scope is very limited and is, only particular spheres of permaculture, education, community organizing and organizational development. Like those kinds of things together are maybe the things that I'm really good at. So all of this really, everything that follows and much of what I speak to are largely informed opinions. I may not show my work during the stream, but if I say anything that you have questions about, let me know and I'll get you the resources that helped me to arrive at where I'm at and to develop the ideas that I'll be sharing with you in our time together. Now, I will say that regretfully, that is where my outline for this evening ends, as I found out shortly before sitting down for this live stream and to put my prep together that a good friend of mine was in an ambulance on their way to the hospital due to labored breathing. And as you might expect, reaching out to friends and helping support the people who were in need in that moment, as well as holding some space for myself. With that news, I only had so much time to put this together, and it wasn't what I had originally set aside. So I will now move into my extemporaneous consideration of how we can create community resilience. And I wanted to look at ourself first, because I do think of permaculture from kind of the inside out these days. And that's a place that we can work from in the beginning in order to understand what our needs are as well as who we might interact with. From there, looking at how we can begin to find people within our community who are doing similar kind of work that we can partner with and begin to develop the relationships that are necessary to dig in really deeply into the relationships that are necessary for this kind of resilience. And then from there, if we're so driven, what can we do from our particular place and perspective to create outreach opportunities? So I'll work through those as best I can. As I say, I apologize. I didn't want to delay this or not hold the live stream because I enjoy them so much, while also wanting to be clear the kind of headspace that I'm in the moment. And waiting to hear how things are going, because as we know, my friend who's in was hospitalized last year with some breathing issues, and we're hoping that it's still the same thing and they can offer a similar kind of intervention, while also being concerned that, with everything else that's going on right now, our friend is someone who works in the public, is one of those folks who, is quote unquote a frontline worker and has been at risk for a long time and also has some health concerns that may impact this if it is COVID. So, yes, thank you all for your grace in these moments. Um, but as I said, I think that a lot of this work does come from us first and foremost. From a permaculture perspective, sitting down and doing that needs and yields analysis of ourself and what we can do and what we have to offer, as well as what we require in our lives, to sit down and get a clear idea of what we can and can't do and what our capabilities are. Because that's going to allow us to find the people who have the skills and knowledge that complement ours very well, and allows us to step into places and be, I don't want to say useful because that kind of productivity language, not where what I want to pull from, but allows us to be an active member of any of the communities that we participate in, and then we can develop the relationships that allow reciprocity when we have needs and ask others for assistance. I see the first place to start this is with our friends and family. I know that not everyone has amazing relationships with their biological family, so that may be found family as well. And begin with those circles that are the closest to you. When I think of the zone model, I look at those people who are the kinds that you would invite over to dinner and have dinner with or go out with. And that those are the people who we can start to have some really in-depth conversations with about our needs and the fact that we just want to create a community resilience collective, to start talking to people about what your concerns are and what you would like help with. If you're someone who's been practicing permaculture for a long time, you're likely very well informed about climate change and energy descent and the possibility of collapse. If you come from an anthropological perspective, likely are familiar with the ways in which communities can both come together as well as fall apart. And so as the individual permaculture practitioner interested in resilience, start talking to your friends and family and the people around you and let them know that you have these concerns and that you're interested in seeing if they would join you in this opportunity and way to build up so that when we're in need, that we're not alone in the process. And I think that it's really important to do that now, because a lot of the work that's necessary to build the deep relationships that create true resilience takes time. There's a figure that I ran across before that for someone to become an acquaintance requires about 20 hours of regular, like, one-on-one or social contact with them. For someone to move to be a close friend, it's like 80 to 120 hours of that kind of or for someone to become a friend is like 80 to 120 hours. Somebody you would call on if you needed to move some furniture or wanted to grab dinner with. But those close friends who are, to borrow that line, the kind of people who who would help you move, but also help you move a body, that can take 200 to 250 hours of time spent together. And so now is the time to do that. If we don't have people like that in our lives, then what can we do to find them and develop those relationships? One of the suggestions that I've had over the years, especially as adults, because it can be hard to find and make friends and develop these relationships, is, where are the people who are engaged in our interests and hobbies? I'm a gamer, and have been for a long, long time. Tabletop RPGs, video games, all of that, miniature war games. And so for me, an important part of that was living in a community that had gaming stores that would eventually, one day, once all of this passes, hold it in-person events. So I can go and play, um, so that I can go and play games with them and get to know them and spend what would be quality time that would be meaningful and important to both of us. And Jason, you popped in there in the chat that it seems like the content of those hours should be a factor, and it definitely is. It's not just time spent, but it is time that is meaningful to you and allows you to develop connections with each other in a way that deepens that relationship. I and that's where like the hobbies and interests come in, because it's something that you mutually care about and are interested in. And those are the suggestions that I encountered over the years, and I find that it's relatively effective at meeting new people, with the caveat that people come and go from our lives as well. There are some numbers that I found that the average friendship lasts around 10 years or so, and that, as some people leave and others come in, that we continue to kind of deepen and continue to create new relationships. And also being able to, as we find those people and have those friend groups and those collectives that are interested in resilience, to be able to communicate with them regularly and stay in touch with them. There's a group, some of them are in the chat tonight, who are not only supporters of this permaculture work and permaculture practitioners themselves, but are also some of my friends in real life. And so for us, we continue to game together regularly, even though the pandemic is still crazy and weird. Hopping online virtually somewhat regularly, and then also, having a Discord where we can have conversations throughout the day, have that kind of asymmetrical chat. If you're if that's not something that you're into, being able to have regular safe get-togethers, if you have a quarantine pod, so that you can have these conversations about what matters and what you're concerned about. And also just some time for fun. I think back to David Fleming's Lean Logic and the importance that he puts in there of celebration and carnival and how important those kinds of things are. And being able to come together and celebrate birthdays and holidays and these other pieces throughout the year, so that once we've had these relationships that we feel really comfortable in, and build on top of that, and then maintain those relationships over time. I think that's been really helpful for me over the years, and that then once you have this kind of community for yourself, that's when we can start not necessarily bringing people into that, but using what we've learned in those spaces and reaching out into the world and finding more people who are interested in the same things that we are, that are related to our concerns and our resilience. Some of the places that I've found a lot of allies and residents have been through mutual aid organizations. If that's something that you're interested in, there are so many of them out there doing all kinds of different work that can be really helpful, and a place for us to show up and learn new skills and connect with people who are, again, actively engaging in community activities. And they are very often local and on the ground where we live, so that we're meeting people who are our neighbors that we can spend time with and are around us and available. Similarly, both of my local regenerative agriculture organizations, PASA, when I was in Pennsylvania, was a really great place as a permaculture practitioner to find a lot of cool and amazing people doing good stuff. And even though many of those organizations are around farming at kind of their core, over time, as the organic agriculture movement has become more commercialized and grown, that they are continuing to pivot and shift. And so that takes them very often closer to a permaculture direction and is really useful. But also, if there's anything else that you're interested in, finding those nonprofits and community organizations that align with your values, that can be those can be other places for us to dig into and find people, who are interested in this same kind of development. And I think that those people in like that zone 2 or zone 3 are really, really important, because I don't see the organizations that are in zone 4 and zone 5, that are much beyond a state or regional level, as being the ones that we're likely to be able to interact with to build the kind of relationships that are necessary to respond to what's happening as well as what's coming. That's where a lot of the influences that I draw from when it comes to community organizing and direct action come from authors like Murray Bookchin, who are about super hyper local organizing, and your friends and neighbors and the people in your neighborhood, if not necessarily your town, because your town itself may be too large, and finding those collectives and bringing them together to have these conversations about what we can do. And that many of these may not necessarily be formal relationships, or I should say, formal relationships, not necessarily formal organizations that are doing this kind of work, that we can pull together a couple of people who we know and start doing this. In the chat, Corinne says, genuine vulnerabilities can expedite deep friendships also. Yes, I definitely agree with that, though I find it can be, what is our level of comfort when it comes to that kind of vulnerability? And if we're in a place to and open to, then we can ask people for that kind of help. Certainly going through difficult times. What is the one book? Is it Paradise Paved in Hell? I'll have to look it up later, but I believe that's the one. Paradise Paved in Hell talks about how when we encounter disasters, that people come together and organize and do a lot of good work. And I think that ultimately most people want the best for themselves and for others, and generally are willing to help. And so who are those people that we can find who do that and will show up at the table over and over again and be a part of the process? And having gone through this on many different occasions, thank you, Julie. It's A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. Yes, that's the book that I was thinking of. Is something that I highly recommend everybody reads, because of how much it breaks apart many of the misconceptions of like how terrible people are when things happen, but usually we're not. And it's one of the things that, like, the lens that I see the world through is one of anarchy, but as a political idea, political philosophy and political theory, not, complete lawlessness. I would never, I'm not, I don't come from that space. And so there's a lot of information that I've had available over the years that show that people generally are pretty good, and that, most of us live in a general state of anarchy, moment to moment, day to day. And it's only when we encounter systems of hierarchy that isn't the case. You show up at a potluck, everybody brings food, everybody eats, everybody goes away. We can do this all the time, in all the moments of our lives, but it's being able to dream big enough that we can organize away from those kinds of things, that we can bring ourselves together in these ways. And it, going through several different iterations of intentional communities, both in person and virtual, working with friends, I came to permaculture because friends and I were organizing because we were concerned about Y2K and what would happen if a disaster would occur. And putting together, resource kits and things like that so that if a disaster struck, we could feed ourselves and be able to take care of one another for a week or two. And breaking apart that myth of the rugged individual that, oh, well, all of us can do it on our own and all that bullshit. Like, we are, with rare exception, incapable of getting through life on our own. And like, I have friends who did rendezvous reenactments. I used to do medieval reenactments. We used to talk about different stories that come from those spaces. And, we think of the mountain man in the United States as one of our cultural myths. And this person who would go and live on their own for years and years and years, it would seem. But they were going out and hunting and coming back to sell their furs and get supplies that they couldn't get when they were out in the world, or when they ran out of shot because they needed to get more lead. Things like that. My grandfather, who was a farmer, which is one of our modern myths of the rugged individual, is that self-sufficient farmer. And again, no, they're not. Yes, they may have skills that make them seem capable and amazing compared to some of the places that we come from in a city-dwelling, white-collar world where, for the last generation or two, many of us weren't taught the hands-on skills needed to make repairs or be able to handle some of the physical requirements of our environment. But I see where we're at with permaculture as a place that we kind of come back to where we can learn those skills again and do so without judgment. Be able to show up and say, I don't know. Or say that there's something in particular that we want to learn. Who can I learn from? Who can I do this with? There's this, I've joked on the show and elsewhere, I keep coming back to it, of the BLAP. Brooklyn, LA, Asheville, and Portland. And I'm sure I say that different ways depending on which cities I happen to remember. But there are just these places that are ideal if you want to be engaging in permaculture. You can just show up and find just about anything you could want. As in some cases, as long as you can afford to live there. But everywhere that we are could use the skills that we have as permaculture practitioners. And that's what, if I were going to ask you of anything in the conversation tonight, the first would be to see if you can find those people who you connect with, who are interested in the same kind of work, and start to put together your own kind of personal aid network among your friends and family. And once you do that, start to have those conversations about how can we reskill? What can we do if something bad happens? To do a risk analysis of what are the real disasters that are likely to occur where you are. And because those are going to be different. And start on that short term. What are the things that you can plan for? I find that having some food on hand, some flashlights and things like that provide for the disasters that we're likely to encounter creates a lot of individual resilience. And helping those people around us get some of those things in their larder as well can remove a lot of the fear and concern that arises when there is a disaster. And that frees us then mentally to look out further into our lives and consider further down the road, like climate change. And what does that look like in our community? And then begin to pull back in our permaculture skills and permaculture design to start designing for those kinds of things so that we can be prepared whatever we face. And it's, yeah. Let me hop back in the chat. I see some more things have popped up. So, Garden of Whedon, we definitely need to rediscover community, myself included. There's this thought that I've continually returned to through much of my life, is that in Western society, American in particular, coming from kind of the lens of how I was raised, that the last 30 years or so, and if someone in the chat is older than I am and can speak to this, I can only kind of go back to around 1990 or so in my thoughts on this, but that over time we wound up trading skills and community for money, working longer hours for greater income, putting in all that time at the job for that promotion, and this weird sense of work, 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 watching the 40-hour work week grow to 40 hours plus overtime, and so much more, that we didn't have time in the same way to help each other. We didn't have time to spend in community in a meaningful way. Instead, when something broke, we called the person who fixes that, the person who had the business, because we had or have the resources to pay them to take care of it for us, rather than asking our neighbor to come over and, trading them something to drink for it. And when we're done having a conversation on the porch, or having them teach us what they were doing in the process. And also, I think about, Corinne, what you were saying earlier about like genuine vulnerabilities. And what about being able to be vulnerable and being able to say that we need help? Because I think there is, in our discourse, to use some specific language, I think that there is an internalized ableism that comes with this, and I may be using that a little inappropriately. There may be a better term for it, but that we're in a place where we should be able to do these things, or if we can't, to pay for them. That we shouldn't ask for help because we should be able to do this on our own, or stand on our own, or do it in a way in which we can suffer comfortably and quietly while trying to figure it out, rather than reaching out to people who are around us and saying, I need you. I need your help. Can we do this? What can we do? And I know it's something that I've struggled with over time. And not only when it comes to the show and living in the gift economy and being able to ask openly about meeting the needs of the podcast, but also with friends and others. There have been a lot of times where I've just done things on my own because I didn't feel comfortable asking, or trusting that people would show up when I needed it. Yeah, that gets into some other things that I don't need to dive deeper into. If you'd like to talk about those kinds of things some more, I'd be happy to do some kind of a private group conversation about vulnerability and talk a bit more about my own. But in this kind of public forum, I kind of reached my limit for where I would want to go in speaking to some of those things. Though, if it is something that you would like to hear more about, let me know. Maybe I could do a conversation about setting boundaries and finding vulnerability in ourselves and in our relationships with others. It's something that I've worked through in my own life, and as usual, it's the only thing that I could speak to is my own perspective. But am more than happy to share it if it allows us to continue to build on what it is that we're working on in these social spheres, and develop something more. Garden, you also say that you do like the internet age, and that you want to learn something you can Google the dumbest questions and learn basic skills quickly. I definitely agree. From audio gear to why is this thing leaking to what's that funny smell in my sink and how do I get rid of it. There's just a ton of information that's out there and available. Some of it's super accurate, some of it's not, but it at least allows us to move forward. I know that I've figured out all kinds of stuff by looking it up on the internet, and at least having enough of an understanding of what I don't know to be able to ask the questions that are necessary to learn more. Which, heck, we could even have a conversation about how do we ask good questions and get good answers. But again, that's something for another time. Um, yeah, and that's also something that, like, in this permaculture space, as we're working on developing our community groups. Yeah, I guess that's really what I'm talking to tonight, is about creating community groups in order to have, um, a network that we can rely on. That there's a lot of room there for us to teach our fun and weird skills. There's a there's a class that I still would love to teach post COVID on how to make a bow and arrow in your backyard with, the cast offs of society, that we can build some very basic tools in order to turn glass into arrowheads, that we can use PVC pipe and fiberglass rods to create a bow strong enough to hunt with. I think that a lot of times we can wind up discrediting what it is that we know and are capable of, or at least are able to muddle through with people, so that, maybe we don't know everything about something. As I say, I don't consider myself an expert really on anything. And so we could still come together and teach what we know so that other people can learn from us. And in those conversations, develop something a lot more than what we might just in the moment. Or be able to show up at a place and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but will you show me or allow me to participate? My friends from the Push, which has now been kind of integrated into some other organizations at this point, but Eric Perot and those folks, when another good friend of mine, Eric, and I were with them at an event, we turned to our buddy Lauren and we're like, we have no idea how to dry stack a foundation, but can we hop in and try? And he's like, yeah, grab some rocks, come over, drop it on here. We'll work on putting it all together. And in that process, I'm not going to say that I want to go out and dry stack a foundation for a house, but I feel a lot more confident about playing with rock now. And it was kind of fun. And again, in that community aspect, many hands makes light work. And it was fun to come together and, in 2 or 3 hours, we were able to move rocks that were on site to the location of where we were dry stacking this foundation and put that foundation together. And obviously, it was a meaningful experience because I'm sharing it with you now. And those are the kinds of experiences that sometimes can be novel, but also life changing. And not only is it something to seek for ourselves, but also something that we can seek to offer others. And it's another space where I think that as permaculture practitioners, even if we're not teaching someone permaculture, we can be giving them meaningful experiences in their lives as we reach out into the world around us. And yeah, as I organize my thoughts, as I say, I was not expecting to be speaking just kind of off the top of my head. This evening I'd planned to have some more notes, but offering classes or inviting people over to our backyard for garden tours and things like that, I think are just a fabulous way to do outreach. Hold a potluck, put something on your community board, find a community space to have a potluck dinner or just a conversation about something that you care about. When it comes to permaculture, it can be, a little goofy to some folks or seem overly complicated. So let's use our abilities to bring people together and do that kind of outreach and organize some of those things. As I say, even if it's not something that we want to do at a community level right now, to grab some folks that we know and just invite them over. Do a plant walk. Do a foraging walk in the city. And, if you're the person in your family who is the forager, go on foraging evenings with them. If you want to deepen your relationship with your partner, go on foraging dates. It's something that my wife and I enjoy doing as we walk around talking about plants and what we find there. and can be a really interesting experience as well. So, yeah. Without where I'm at the moment is in part 2 of the community resilience conversation. I kind of want to come back and I think talk more about that interface between ourselves and our local community after I've spent a lot of time kind of on this personal relationship side of things. And we can talk to those other pieces some more then. Um, because, yeah, I think the first place to start is just to work on your personal sense of community and finding some of those people who you already know who might be interested in these things. Again, doesn't have to be a formal, like, we're going to talk about community resilience meeting, everybody, my house, a particular date, particular time, or anything like that. But just start, send a message to your best friend, or one of your cousins, or that person you play basketball with every other week, and just be like, hey, I'm looking around the world and I'm a little bit concerned about these things. I was wondering what you think about them as well. And if they respond in a way that resonates with you, then continue the conversation. And just, reach out to maybe a half a dozen of those folks and see if you can find 2 or 3 and bring them together, have dinner some night and talk about it a little bit more. Or, start that text group or signal group, your Discord server, and invite folks in so that you can talk about it. If you're ever interested in any of this and want to talk about it with me, of course, I'm always available. It's also any of this, if you'd like me to dig into further in episodes of the show, or, as I say, do a group call that we can hop on and have a more of a give and take rather than this me chatting for a while and folks typing into the chat, we can do that too. Lots of different ways to address this. I also look at virtual communities. If you're not in a place where you have people who are close to you in the real world, there are different places to look where you might be able to find folks online and in this virtual space. And that's one of the places for me that I've found the most value in the last couple of years, between not only the pandemic, but due to some health concerns, it's hard for me to travel anymore. And as I age and deal and work through that, and how those health concerns impact my life, being able to use this virtual space and how we can just use the internet to connect with people again, like I say, as we're doing right now, or we can do in all of these other different ways, that there may be some virtual communities. And that's also something for all of you who are here in the conversation tonight. If you're not part of it, the patron Discord is a really good place to hop in and be a part of conversations across a broad range of topics. And if you haven't already, Patreon, you can pledge for less than $1 a month if you do an annual pledge, and that gives you access to the patron Discord where we have a lot of conversations. And as I said earlier, that's what fueled tonight's Creating Community Resilience. Though I don't feel like I necessarily was as cohesive on that as I would like to be, it is something that I see as ongoing. Folks who are in the chat, let me hop back over there. I will move this. So let me get back to where we were. Steve, people are way more complicated than plants and other animals. Then Jason, you say that I think you might be underestimating how complicated plants and other animals are. In the context of tonight's conversation, I don't want to touch on the plants and animals piece. We can certainly talk about the complexity in an ecological model sometime, of plants and animals and those relationships. Jason, looks like you dropped, what is it, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Walben, as a resource for people who are looking to explore plants and animals. and those relationships further, recommend that, sure. If people want to look into that more deeply. When it comes to people, and a lot of what I'm speaking to tonight about community resilience pulls from a lot of my work in, as I say, intentional communities and building deep relationships and diffusing often tense situations from business to personal relationships and everything in between. And there's a lot of work that I think, well, yeah, there just simply is a lot of work that goes into the frameworks and ways that we communicate in order to make a lot of this work and work well. And I, from my experience, shall we say, and a lot of what I've worked through over the years to get to where I am now from where I was in the beginning as a permaculture practitioner, I didn't have the soft skills in the beginning to navigate a lot of this complexity and to be personally resilient enough and be able to set the appropriate boundaries to have the complicated, deep, and often vulnerable conversations that are necessary to be a part of a community in a deep sense of that community meaning. And even with people who I've been friends with for 20 plus years, we're just now getting to the point where those relationships are as interdependent and interwoven with the lines of communications that are necessary that I would feel that we could create the situations that are necessary to survive a broad range of experiences and disasters and opportunities and everything in between. And that's, as I say, that group of friends who I've known for 2 decades or more in some cases are the ones who came together around our friend going to the hospital tonight. And watching the way that each of us stepped into different roles among our peer group in order to make sure that people were taken care of, knowing who one of their best friends is, so that we could step in and help them and support that individual. While around the fringe, the rest of us are communicating about, like, who's close to both of them that can get them resources. Who do we know who has had a rough time lately and shouldn't be informed about this right now, so that we can loop back to them later and let them know what's going on while they handle their own current personal situation. And watching all of that work together in harmony all in one moment, all in a couple of hours, was really amazing to see. But I also think of a group of anarchists that I'm a part of and how quickly we come together out of solidarity, even though we may not necessarily know the depths of what each other is experiencing. That there's a lot of outreach there. If someone is just having a bad day, whoever is able to can step in and say, hey, what do you need? What can I do? I can offer this, based on where you're at, what you're experiencing right now. Would this be helpful? And also knowing that if we have a specific need to be filled, that we can ask for that need to be met. How it's met may not be the way that we expect, but that's a group of people, because of the way that our worldview and ideology bring us together, we can work together pretty quickly and easily, while also having some deep conversations about how, we're never going to agree with somebody 100% about anything. And, what can we be okay with and what can we not be okay with? Where can we support people in a way that's meaningful to them, that doesn't push back against our own personal perspective and morals and ethics? And where do they overlap? And that's where I was seeing, where was it? Dino You were saying that you personally feel like everything is political. I largely agree that most of what we do is political. It's just whether or not it's at the forefront of the conversation or not, and whether we address it as if it is something that should be handled in a way that we might handle something politically, or whether we can look at it from an individual relationship. Um, and there are different ways for us to move through these different pieces and develop the skills and what we need to get there. I I would not want to do a workshop on nonviolent communication, though there's a lot that I've learned from it over the years. I still fall back on the perspective that nonviolent communication is also one of the most violent things that I've ever experienced, or can be, when it comes to the ways in which we communicate, but would certainly be interested in doing an hour or two perhaps on how to have deep, vulnerable, bounded conversations, and how we can ask for the help that we need from people that we know, and be able to offer help in return based on where we're coming from. Um, but yeah, and Steve, you say you don't have soft skills either, and it's hard. I don't. As with building the meaningful relationships, as we don't have community and village in the same way anymore, I don't know that we've been taught how to handle people more than on a surface level in many cases. It's the people who we get together with for a little bit of this, a little bit of that. In one group, maybe we socialize with the people who we work with. Maybe they want to socialize with us. There are lots of different ways it kind of comes and goes. But how do you get past our espoused values and the masks that we wear, and to the people who we are underneath? And not only is the people who we are underneath and the mask that we wear as we're in the world, but also which masks do we wear when we look in the mirror and see ourselves? What are the lies that we tell ourselves? What are the feelings of being an imposter that we listen to when we feel that way, and that we may feel like an imposter, and yet we trust ourselves that view of ourselves is real. And it's a large part of like my storytelling for personal transformation material is about breaking down those kinds of boundaries, and to though I do take a self-centered approach, that it's about breaking down some of those walls and barriers so that we can understand how we are a part of something bigger than ourselves, and that who we are is more than just our individual story, even though it may start with our personal story. Um, but it's, yeah, like I say, it's a lot to work through. I'm in my early 40s and have reinvented myself more or less every decade. And, like, yeah, I can kind of walk you through this. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be a marine biologist. When I got ready to go off to college when I was 16, I was preparing to be an anthropology and sociology dual major because I wanted to study people. And now I've kind of looped back around to this because it's what I really care about. My upbringing, as I shared earlier, is very people focused. So is my permaculture. So is all the stuff that I do. And that's where, I'm interested in sharing stories from all these different people on the show, so that as a listener, you can find people who you resonate with. Because even if the person who's on the show is on the other side of the world from where you live, that you can know you're not alone. That there are other people who are doing the same things you are. There are people who are struggling with the same questions you are. And that as divisive and fractious as the permaculture community can be at times, and how much I have no patience for it whatsoever anymore, not that I think I ever really did, that I may not agree with you on everything, but if you're looking for a place in the world, I'm here to help you find it. And I care about you and where you are in the world, because to me, none of us are free until all of us are free. And so, how do we work together to help each other have as much freedom as possible? And as we become aware of one another's struggles, what can we do to lighten that burden? And how can we come together collectively and as communities to do that? Because of seeing the world through these political lenses, growing up with a worldview that was all about class. And, you know, that rural Appalachian poor is a particular kind of crushing that, if you're not familiar with it, can be hard to comprehend. But those are the stories of my life. I have some family members who were Holocaust survivors, and I grew up with their stories and how both of them were sent to death camps and what they did to survive and how they survived and how few of those members of my family made it. Hold on, sorry. It's a little heavy to put it out there that way. But yeah, like that's really, all of that together is where I'm coming from with this. Because I want you to have all the resources that you need to help make your world and the world a more just, verdant, and peaceful place. And there are lots of different ways that we can accomplish that. And yeah, if there's just any way that I can help you with that, let me know. I apologize. I feel like I got a little bit off from where I wanted to go. Oh, yes, the other thought with that is when I see what's happening in the world, because I look at the world from a community and collective space, that there are a lot of systemic forces that are harmful to most of us. Like even me, looking the way that I do, with the education that I have, the way that I present to the world, I am freer than many, but I know that I am also not truly free. And so if I'm in the place that I'm at and know that there are a lot of other people in the world who are more deeply impacted by the forces that be, and that I don't see the system that exists as liberatory or something that will actively free people. And so what can we do to do that? What can we do in our role as members of our communities once we become aware of different issues to make a difference for others? This is also kind of informing the direction of the show moving forward, and myself as well, as I take a friend's challenge to not be the middle of the road host of the show as I have been for a long time, to bring more of these perspectives about peace and breaking apart scarcity, about creating abundance, all of the ideas that permaculture has to offer. How do we do that in the social space? And though I still want to have some people on who are doing amazing real world projects, based on a suggestion that I received earlier today to bring back in my friend Erin Harvey from the Kale Yard to talk about her work of building a farm and CSA from scratch, and all of that work and soil blocks, and to just kind of catch up and see what's happened since that conversation many years ago, to have her on to talk about some of these practical pieces, because the conversations are fun for me, that I'm looking at more of this community and political space. What can we do to organize? What can we do to liberate and find solidarity? How do we take permaculture and apply it to these spaces and make it more radical again? How do we break apart the dogma that has been built around Bill Mollison and the designer's manual and get away from that? Or some of the early ideas that informed permaculture as like a land-based only practice. I agree, we need to know a lot about the landscape and how to read it, and that growing food is an amazing undertaking if it's something we can do because of how much it frees us from the powers that be. You know, one of the most transformational books for me on my path as a permaculture practitioner was reading Robert Rodale's Save Three Lives and hearing about, you know, building food systems that don't look like food, or from a family friend whose parents fled into the jungles of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge and were able to survive because they knew the foods that were available there. That we can do a lot to help ourselves in the landscape. But from there, what else do we do with it? How do we make it more than it is? How do we remove the sense that permaculture is a Western or a largely whitewashed perspective? For me, finding the other anarchists and people who are involved in this space, because I swear there are tens of us, there may even be dozens of us, but there are folks who are doing amazing work there. How can we also, within the body of listeners, create a virtual community where we can rely on each other? As I say, I have the patron Discord, which is a place because I can only manage so much myself, and so the numbers that are there are about all that I could take. But it's like, you know, could we create a larger podcast Discord for people to be able to connect with each other? So, you know, if you are listening to this, if you're still part of the live stream right now, or you're catching this on a replay and you've made it this far into it, now that we're at more than an hour, and are interested in collaborating on creating a virtual space where we can communicate and come together in a way that is expressive and open and, do I want to say real, vulnerable maybe, because that's a phrase that we've come back to, but a place for us to build those kinds of relationships and get deep. I'd love to talk about that. Earlier in the development of the show, I had looked at the possibility of forums, but I don't really like those anymore. I like just because of the way that they're structured. But anyway, if you have any thoughts on that, you know, so that we could create a regular virtual community, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas on how we can talk about this, or what you'd like me to talk about in future conversations here on the live streams that get like this, you know, deeper and off script, let me know across all the things that we've gotten into tonight. There's just a lot of different places we can go from here. And these live streams form an important part of this for me, because there's just so much that I have encountered and processed and worked through in my 12 years now of practicing permaculture. And I'm sure that you have questions that I have answers to that I can't even form the questions for because of where it sits in my timeline of practice. And also that, as I say, the landscape isn't my forte because there's a lot of that I feel has already been answered, or there are resources that are available that you can find and connect to that will answer a lot of those questions. And so, okay, thank you, Garden. I'll look into high-low as well. There's just a lot of different ways to kind of hack at this, and a lot of what I'm looking for are inexpensive, easy ways to bring people together using existing resources. Also, if you're, I take it from what you say that you're using that, are you using that for a PDC that you're teaching? If so, and you'd like to collaborate on future PDCs, let me know. I've got some models that I'm working from, and I'm building out my roster of guest instructors for things like that. Um, and would certainly like to be able to see more of us collaborate on those experiences, um, because of the benefits that it provides students. Yeah, I also have a radical approach when it comes to education, but that's again a conversation for another time. I feel like I've touched on quite a few future potential conversations. If I'm not personally too embarrassed to watch this stream as a replay, I'll go back through and pull some of the things that I mentioned to plan for future conversations. Um, I do feel like I've been kind of only catching bits and pieces of the chat. At this point, having run more than an hour and said a whole bunch of different things, if you have any, if you have any questions before I draw this to a close for the night, go ahead and drop those into the chat. I'm happy to continue this for a while. I'm just kind of out of my own thoughts on all of this right now. Um, just in the moment. Everything is political. We keep finding animals and plants. Anyone is more aware. Yeah, Dino, you say, I value your response. Thank you. Appreciate these thinking points. I spend all day, every day, like up to my eyes in this. So I'm more than happy to share anything that I can and kind of, yeah, just happy to share whatever I can. Some of my colleagues referred to me kind of as the permaculture librarian, and that's, I mean, it seems to be true. There's just so much that I've worked through over the years, between the hundreds of books read for all the guests that I've had on the show, the hundreds and hundreds of interviews, plus the thousands of people who I've been in touch with directly through email and elsewhere. That, yeah, there's a lot locked up in my head or on my bookshelves that I can't get out there unless, except through moments like this. I find that if I sit down and write a list of questions, I can't authentically answer them. But if someone else asks me something, it kind of cuts the roof off of my library, and all of that just kind of spills out into the world. And so I'm thankful for the questions and this opportunity. Okay, folks, it does look like there would be interest in a general Discord. If you're part of this, and I'm more than happy to create the channel for it. If some folks would be interested in moderating conversations, really just for spam and things like that, I just ask, if we do something like this, please be polite, and we'll kind of take it from there. Yeah, we can see where it goes. Jason, you mentioned Derek Jensen. A lot of my worldview was built on his writings during the 2000s. I had him on the show, and it was an amazing experience to have the conversation at the time. But yeah, the places that he's gone since then kind of raised my eyebrow at. And yeah, as with so much has happened tonight, having a conversation about separating the speaker, teacher, or writer from their work. Where do we find that value? Garden, okay, part of the Verge PDC. Yeah, I'm familiar with that class. Still continue to speak with some of the folks from Verge from time to time. And a lot of as I say, my work is almost all virtual right now, and likely to just continue to grow in that way. I don't know if we've ever connected via email. If you can drop me a message, I don't have my scene set up that shows that, but of course, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com if you're interested in being a guest instructor or collaborating on a virtual PDC. I'm more than happy to. Let me know. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. I was following Garden's thread there. If it's something you'd like to talk more about, yeah, same thing. Drop me an email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. And yeah, anybody who's in the chat who would be interested in that, or who's watched this, let me know. Putting together that roster and looking to offer my next online PDC starting in, I think it's July 1st, to do a course on ecological literacy that's 24 hours that serves as an introduction. And then in mid to late September, do a practicum then that completes the PDC material and provides the entire 72-hour course. Um, I'm looking at using a different model for this. And so, depending on your perspective of what the PDC should and shouldn't be, um, well, we'll have to talk and see if we agree on how it's being taught and kind of broken apart. Um, as I say, as with everything, I'm more than happy to share my notes and the resources that led me to the place that I come from. Um, yeah, Jason, I didn't quite get through. All right, there's quite a bit there with Derek Jensen. I'm going to pop to your point about how people are absolutely heavily invested in the system. And yeah, it can be hard to try something different. I have lived in some deeply alternative ways for more than 10 years, and I can't say that it's been easy. You know, when you, again, to speak back to some of those pieces of poverty, living in the gift economy for a long time, there's this. If you've ever been really poor, um, there's this idea of like eating from the back of the cabinet because you don't have enough money for any other food. Like the idea of going and picking up a couple packs of ramen just is not possible. And so you're digging through your cabinets and you find that, you know, can of pumpkin that you bought because you were going to make a pie years ago, and you're just kind of looking at it, trying to figure out how to make food from it, or you know, make something to eat from it. What spices do you have that might be able to make something? Or you know, you've got one can of peas that's a little expired, maybe a little bit of pasta, and you're just trying these different things to figure out how you're just going to get your next meal. And I've spent some time in those spaces, um, both as the host of the show and beforehand. Um, yeah, there've been some times in my life that have been like that, and yet I say that not feeling terrible about it. It's just an experience that I went through, but there have been times where I've wanted to trade my morals and ethics and what I believe in for the comfort. To be, to just know that I'm going to be taken care of because I had the money to do it. And it was only when I came into community and did all the things that I talked about over the last hour and 15 minutes that a lot of those worries went away. And it's a completely different experience from being on your own, trying to cobble together resources and being part of a collective and a community. And yeah, as I come to this moment right now, after all of this, what I reflect on is how different it is once you have community, and the importance of being able to build that. At one of my darkest times during the podcast, asking for some help when I thought that I was okay, but knew that I wasn't. And one of my good friends who had been a professional chef and baker showed up and dropped off a couple dozen wholesome, nutritious, gluten-free cookies for me. And another friend of mine who had been a chef, who was a part of the permaculture community, was like, hey, let me come over to your house, I'm going to cook for you. And loaded up a bag full of groceries and came over and cooked. And since then, and like having those experiences and finding very often that the people who I thought were going to be there for me weren't. And the people who showed up were folks who I never thought would, or who I didn't think that I had the relationships with for them to show up, but they did. And now, and like having moved through some of those experiences over the last 7 years or so, that now that I'm in a place where I have several communities that I'm a part of and feeling held by them throughout all of these strange ongoing pieces that I continue to manage because of how important this work is. Having people who go, hey, I believe in you and what you're doing enough that I'm likely never going to be in a place to do what you do, so I want to make sure that you can keep doing it. And them stepping in and lending a hand. Some of the folks who are currently like lending me their labor and volunteering their thoughts and ideas right now, and the world of difference that that has made. Doing some of the pieces, like working through how to become stable, because in a way, because I can't live in the gift economy as I have for much longer, and needing to be in a place where all of this is financially doable in a meaningful way for where I live, yet at the same time knowing that I want to do all of my permaculture work in deeply radical ways because I want this to be accessible. I want the show to be able to remain free at the point of access for people, that I can still give anybody who needs it a half an hour of my time at no cost to them, that they can send me that email or make that phone call and say, hey, can you help me? And I can say yes, and that I can do it because of all of you and what you've given me over the years, and I hope will continue to in the future because of how much of an impact you're making by showing up to live streams like this so that we can have this conversation. Being able to dig into some of the weird things that we have. I don't really say weird, but it's just stuff that I didn't think that I was going to talk about tonight. Being able to do these live streams and organize them around a subject that somebody reaches out and wants to learn about. As I've spoken with people who are interested in permaculture and children, that I want to be able to, have at least one live stream a month that discusses activities for children, to prepare families to be able to spend that time with kids, as part of this work that I'm kind of referring to as the one yard schoolhouse is what I'm kind of putting all this together. But that part of the part of the podcast's work and part of my permaculture work can be a part of that. There's a lot of different ways to work on this, and I'm just super thankful that I've been able to do this for this long in ways that I know some of my other colleagues haven't been able to. So yeah. Let me pop back to the chat real quick. If there's nothing else, I'm going to read through the last couple comments here that I didn't get to and get ready to sign off. But as I say, if you want to, feel free to drop something in. I can go for a couple more minutes and then I'll head out of here. So all season, once I only had elbow noodles, butter, salt, and pepper for quite a while. I was in some pretty similar spaces. For me, it was peanut butter and jelly, and gluten-free bread, just because the calories that all filled together. And just got something nutritious in my stomach for a while. So yeah, I can feel you there. Jason... our system goes to great lengths to make sure that living outside of it is as uncomfortable as possible, specifically to make sure that people don't want to be there. Yeah, and it's conversations that I had with some of my friends in the permaculture community because I was in a different socioeconomic class than they were at the time, and that unless you have some wealth that allows you to be free from a lot of the influences of our society, or able to live in such a way that give you something similar, just living in modern society, regardless of where you are, unless you are very wealthy, is expensive. I mean, I look at where my wife and I are now, and on paper, the numbers are one thing, but when you look at what the cost of living is here, then it's not. It doesn't. Those numbers would be completely different if they were being earned in central Pennsylvania, where I came from. Like the kinds of numbers here that are just getting by would be life changing there. And yeah, it's just a big difference with the way a bunch of that kind of comes together. And that, you know, if you want to have, like, now that applying for jobs requires internet access, so now you need internet access of some kind, which makes it even more expensive to live. And or looking at the programs that are available if you don't have money, very often require time during regular business hours, that if you're trying to work and participate in those programs, it can be hard to get there, or having to take time off of work in order to go. Like, our system is just all kinds of screwed up and incapable of really helping a lot of people, which is, yeah, another conversation we can get into sometime, um, about how do we kind of push back against that. And then all season, you want to do a conversation on functional fire breaks and fire guilds, something I'd be happy to dig into. It's not my area of expertise per se, but I've had folks on the show who are good at it. I also do come from a disaster preparedness and risk management background. From what I went through in graduate school, my wife also has a master's degree in emergency management and has studied a lot of that, and I'd be more than happy to bring her in, or at least talk to her about some of that material, and we can kind of do a top-down conversation and start from like the risk management and other pieces, and then work our way down to what does that look like to where you are specifically. If you'd like to drop me a message and let me know where you're at in the world, that'll help kind of inform that conversation, to know what species to consider to look at some of the what may be happening politically or elsewhere in your community that could help or hinder that kind of work. And yeah, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you via email if you want to drop me something, and we can talk about that a little. Or we could also, I could plan that to be one of these live streams. I'm looking for topics to include in the live streams. As I said earlier, I am terrible about coming up with topics and being able to talk about them in this kind of format. But if you want to send something to me because you'd love me to drop it in here, more than happy to do so. It's, yeah, this space is a place to do this kind of live in real time and be able to have kind of a back and forth in ways that the format of the show doesn't. Um, okay. Yeah, I have some family who are looking to move out your way. So yeah, let me pull some things together. And how about I just include um, designing for fire in an upcoming live stream, and I'll put together some notes. I'll talk to my wife, pull from some of the other things that have available. I can grab some links to some of the interviews that I've done on fire and designing for disasters, and be able to drop those in the conversation as well, and be able to point back to, yeah, some of the folks who I've talked to, and yeah, we can take it from there. Okay. Yeah, long-term planning would be cool too. It's one of those pieces that, I mean, Bill touched on. It's something that came up in my permaculture design course, but it doesn't it doesn't have the same resonance in a lot of the current conversations, I don't think, Garden, about really having long-term planning. But that's where I also goes back to breaking out of the dogma of permaculture, and what and how much people look back to Bill and his designer's manual and all the techniques. And so many of the conversations that I see about permaculture all across the internet are techniques. Where do I put my cucumbers? How do I build a swale? And that's not permaculture to me. That's the results of permaculture. But if you do a good design and really apply the ideas of permaculture well, you're not going to have those questions when you get there, because your design, your landscape analysis your use of ecological literacy and reading the landscape, and then taking all of that and putting it together in a design answers everything. And that's, yeah, anyway, that's something that really, yeah, is something that I will be speaking more to in the future. And it's part of the series that I recorded with Rosemary Morrow. We touch on some of that. And she's been someone whose work I've admired for a long, long time. And getting to spend more than a dozen hours with her putting together that series really led me in some. It reinforced some thoughts that I've had for a number of years, but didn't want to bring into the world because of the pushback that I got from it, as well as the amount of codifying and credentialing that the permaculture community is getting into now, and the struggle between permaculture within academia or not. Does it belong here or doesn't it? What do we do? What don't we do? Then it's, well, the only PDC that we can teach is Bill's, because he's the person who went out into the world and that's what he taught. And so we have to replicate the designer's manual over and over and over again, even if most of that material has absolutely no meaning to our students. And it makes me just slam my head into my desk with how asinine that is, that we're relying on something that was developed more than 40 years ago. That it's a book that now is more than 35 years old, as if it is sacrosanct and shouldn't be changed. And I'm just gonna fight against that now and over and over and over again. Bill was a broad, admirable thinker with his ability to look at something and find the problems with it and be able to propose solutions. I was never able to speak with Bill. His health was in decline by the time I felt comfortable enough to try to reach out to him. But I've spoken to some of his colleagues who knew him from early on, some people who were dear friends of his, and they've shared some insights into Bill's mind and his thought process that I didn't know before, and gives me a greater appreciation for where he comes from. And that taking more of that and like admiring what he did and what he gave to us in the designer's manual, and but while accepting that he cribbed his notes and didn't share his sources, and that the community has remained loyal to that material in ways that have caused permaculture in some ways, I think, to stagnate. And so let's break away from that. And those are some of the pieces that I'll be tying together in the ways as we move through in the future. But yeah, we can chat about that some more if you'd like to, and what that will look like. There's just a lot of different ways that we can take this, and that there was a line that was shared to me when I was studying ecology, that my ecology professor was like, when I studied ecology 20 years ago, that what I am teaching you today is not the ecology I learned 20 years ago. The ecology you know in 5 years will not be what I teach you today. And I find that to be deeply true. And permaculture needs to evolve, as does the PDC and everything else that comes with it. And that's what I want to continue to work towards, and in these conversations. So, yeah, I think I've got a pretty good framework for that and how to discuss it. From here, I'll go back through the chat and pull a lot of what you've shared in order to put together some topics for future live streams. The next one is, I believe it's Thursday, January 20th. I have an end scene here for the live stream that'll pop up that gives that date. Real quick as we go through this, Steve, I agree. Yeah, the technique trap is terrible, and it's something that I think that I need to, continually talk about how the techniques are not permaculture. I see you've seen similar issues with the PDC and it being taught out of the designer's manual. All season I've And Steve, yeah, I studied with Andrew. He was one of the teachers during my teacher training. I love his work. I love everybody who he's brought together at OSU, and that is, um, I mean, that's the only online PDC that I recommend at this point because I know the way that Andrew teaches. I trust his integrity in deep ways. And so he is the person who I point a lot of people to if when they're looking for an online PDC. Um, what I'm looking to do in the near future is going to be different from what Millicent is doing. And yeah, we'll just see how these different ideas develop. I think that it's super important for us to have a diversity of ideas and to come together. Also, perhaps some friends and I in the community are talking about trying to do a professional permaculture practitioners convergence online sometime in the third or fourth quarter of this year. And as that comes together, I'll probably be reaching out and mention it in an upcoming live stream for your feedback. If there's anyone who you think would be a good fit, and give you kind of a bit of an outline of what we're considering so that we can find some good people to bring in and hopefully have some round tables. And hopefully, as one of the organizers, I don't have to hope for anything. I can plan it into this that we will have breakout sessions so that and roundtable conversations to dig into like what should the PDC look like? What does it mean to practice permaculture professionally? What is a good permaculture education? Who are some of our favorite people in the community? To talk about credentials, radical education, and a lot of these other pieces that are super meaningful to me in all this work and making it more accessible and meaningful to everybody. So I'm gonna thank you all now for joining me for this. For those of you who have stayed with me through so much of it, I really appreciate it. The next one, as I say, yeah, I think it's Thursday, January 20th. That's going to be midday, so 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Look for some posts and announcements that will confirm that. And yeah, I will see you all again soon. More episodes of the podcast coming. And as always, if you ever want to get in touch and there's anything that I can do for you, feel free to drop me an email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com, or you can always email again? No. Or you can text or call 717-827-6266, and I will do whatever I can to help you along in your journey. Take care, everybody, and have a great rest of your day, evening, or night, depending on where you are in the world.